Bobber down, reel down. There we go. First fish of the day, and it came up pretty good. Just got to this new group. And we have a walleye. Nice little eater. Ooh. Oh, I don't want to net it because sometimes your slip bobbers get gunked up in, whoa, in the net. Ooh, and there it's down. Well, there we go. First walleye of the day on the slip bobber. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into one of probably the most effective techniques that you can use throughout the summer. This is going to be part of a series that I'm going to be doing where I'm going to go in depth into some of my favorites, some of my most used presentations. And today, we're going to do a deep dive into a bunch of just little tips and tricks that can help you be a little more effective, a little more efficient when using slip bobbers. And then we're going to talk about rod, reel, line, all kind of the nuts and bolts about that as well. So we're going to keep fishing. We got a school of fish off to the side here. We're going to cast on these and give you a bunch more tips. Yeah, you can see a group not far over here. Right on the edge of those weeds. Not sure if they're gonna be panfish or if they are walleyes. Bobber down, staying down, might be a walleye. There we go. Right on the edge of those weeds. You can see a few more there too. And we got a solid walleye. I was thinking those were walleyes, they were set up, but you never know when you're on the edge of weeds like that if they're bass. Oh, this guy is staying down. There we go. Bring him back over this side so you can see him. Those were like 30 feet off to that side. You can see a few more still swimming around those weeds, but even though they were pretty close and we're sitting in 10 feet of water, I got that slip bobber right over there and it popped it right away. I'll show this guy off quick. Solid fish. You can see right there, right on that tungsten short shank jig. This one is right kind of mixed on the edge of these weeds. We'll pop that guy out. Oh, another quality fish, nice weed walleye. So that's gonna kind of lead us right into the when, because not every time, not every situation is a slip bobber gonna be useful, beneficial, the most effective way. One of the most important factors is having stationary fish. Not saying that you can't target moving fish with them, because you can with some of those suspended fish, but it's just more efficient when you are targeting fish that are kind of hanging around a certain area. You know, a lot of times when I'm on structure, I'm looking for either a patch of weeds. You can see on this group right here specifically, they're hanging around an edge of a weed. So they have something that they're hanging around that they're sitting by. Maybe it's on some rock structure, maybe it's on a point. Those are areas where these fish are likely going to be schooled up. You see that a lot, especially in our area on some of these deeper, clearer lakes. These fish school up quite a bit. These are perfect times to use slip bobbers because they're going to be staying in a specific area and you can just hang that bait right in front of them. Another time I really like to use slip bobbers is when you're fighting any sort of suspended fish. That could be suspended 2 feet off bottom, that could be suspended 20 feet off bottom. Whatever it is, when you are targeting suspended fish, that is a great time to be able to use a slip bobber to get that bait up off bottom and just kind of hang it in their face. Otherwise, if you're casting, you got to have it bait moving. You've seen that in a lot of my videos lately, seeing these suspended fish. One of the things we've been finding out with forward-facing sonar more and more is walleyes are not always on bottom. In fact, oftentimes they're not. They're suspended and they're following your baits down. And so being able to have a bait up off bottom targeting these suspended fish is key. Another one that I really like to use slip bobbers for is working rocks. Anytime you're working some rocks, it can be very snaggy. You know, when you're working jigs or even jig and wraps or reaction style baits, that can get snagged up very easily. Whereas slip bobber, you can float it right over top of those rocks. You're not gonna have to get worried about getting snagged up. A third one that I really like to use slip bobbers for is doing what we're just doing right now, is weeds. One reason why I like to use slip bobbers around weeds is sometimes you can get it right on that weed edge and just hang it there. If these fish are finicky, they need to look at it for a little while, you can just get it right in front of their face and let them stare at it, where if you're working a jig or working a moving bait, that's gonna work through that zone very quickly, and if they don't react and bite right away, they might not. So being able to hang that right in that zone, if there's maybe some open patches and some weeds. I did a weed walleye video last year. I'll throw all these videos and the links too if you're curious, check those out. But it was just a super effective way to target these things with slip bobbers, being able to get it right in that sweet spot, get it right in front of those fish's face and convince them to bite. So we're gonna cast back on these fish and then I'm gonna talk through some of the different setups, some of the different variations that I do depending on how I'm targeting these fish. One of the things you will find out about weeds is fish can hide in them very easily. So sometimes you might not see a fish. Oh, just like that. One came up for it. Did not see that one right out of the gates. But one came up for it. Another one kind of milling around there. It popped it. Good reel. Ooh. Didn't want it. Spit it after it popped it. See if he's back. There he's slowly back, slowly back. I'll reel down till I feel weight. Big swinging hook set. Oh, that is why I love these slip bobber walleye rods from Tubi. This one I might... I was just gonna boat flip that guy, and clearly that was a bad choice. All right, we're gonna get one more before we talk setup. One came right over. A couple came right over. There he popped it. Bobber down, reel down till I feel weight. Big swinging hook set. There we go. Not a big one. Whoa. This thing looked like a 12-incher. Actually a decent fish here. This thing looked like a 12-incher when I was reeling it up. So I was gonna boat flip it, and again, not a good choice. I need to start grabbing it by hand. But that is another one. You can see right on the edge of those weeds. There's a few just kind of milling around. I'll try to circle those for you so you can kind of see which ones they are. But again, weeds are a great opportunity to use slip bobbers. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the setup that I'm using and the different setups that I use in different situations. This one is a very basic setup, probably what you may or may not have seen a lot. I have my braided main line. On my braided main line, I have there you can see it. This is the thread bobber stops. You know, there's a lot of different kinds. I like the thread ones, and I would spend the extra money on getting some nicer ones. I can't even remember some of the brands that I really like. But the thread ones, some of them, when you cut them to trim them up, they fray quite a bit. But getting some sort of thread bobber stop on there, obviously these ones aren't gonna matter quite as much, but then they usually come with some sort of bead. I do like a bright colored bead like that that's contrasted to my line, so I can kind of see where it's at if it's getting stuck up, because obviously with slip bobbers, there's so many working parts. It's easy to get slipped up. These are the Norfin light bite bobbers. A couple things I like. One, it's weighted. I like to use, no matter what you're using, whether it's a wall bobber or these, I like to use a weighted one just to help it stand upright a little bit more. Another thing, brass grommet on there. Being able to have that just helps on some line wear and tear. And I like to use these ones that are a little bit longer. I can't even remember what the style is called. And the main reason that I like to use that is I feel like it gets hooked up less when I'm casting. You know, sometimes with those wall bobbers, when I'm casting, they kind of flop around and they get hooked up in themselves. We're going to talk about some things you can do to help alleviate some of that. But that is one of the reasons why I kind of switched to these style of bobbers last year. Still will get hooked up sometimes, but I do seem to get hooked up less. From there, I have some sort of swiveled. Not going to be a huge deal because you're not doing a ton of twisting, so you're not necessarily going to need like a ball bearing swivel, but it's just nice to be able to have that to separate your bobber and your main line from your fluorocarbon leader. Now you can see I have about, I don't know, 2 feet, 3 feet of a fluorocarbon leader. That can vary. If I'm on a super clear lake and I want to, you know, have a little more separation, I will do 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, a little harder cast then. But you can also go down to like a 6-bone fluorocarbon leader. Just to make it a little more finesse, what I'm running right now is 10. I've already gotten bit off a couple times a day with pike, so that is sometimes why I will upsize to 10, 12, but typically running an 8 to 10, sometimes down to 6 if I'm working to be really finessey. And one of the big keys is having a tungsten jig. And the reason why I like tungsten jigs is, one, it is obviously more dense, so I can have a smaller profile. Obviously a slip bobber is a little more of a finesse style approach. Another nice thing about using tungsten is if I have a tungsten jig, this one is the 1/8 ounce Northland short shank jig. These ones I like because it's a great little presentation for like leeches. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what I'm gonna use for crawlers. But I really like this one specifically for leeches, sometimes for minnows as well. But being able to use that tungsten, you sometimes can avoid having a weight on there. I will use one of two things. Sometimes I will either use like an egg weight, an egg sinker that will slide up and down the line. That one is very efficient. But one of the things that I find with that is when I net fish, when it can slide like that, I end up with a few more tangles, a few more twists. So instead of using an egg sinker, one of the things I will use is just a simple split shot. Again, they both have their pros and cons, but the split shots, one, you can take them on and off very easily. You can change weights very easily. And two, you don't deal with some of the tangles. Like I said, when that can slide, especially when you net fish, they get in between the loops of the net and they just get tangled up much more easily. So that is one of the reasons why I will use a split shot versus an egg weight. A lot of times for me, I'm running an 8 to 10 pound braided line. One of the nice things about going down to like 8 is it just castability is great. You can cast farther, but also your line is a little more flexible, a little more prone to some tangles, where the 10 pound, not a lot, but just a little bit stiffer, maybe doesn't get tangled quite as much. So as I set up when I'm using my leeches, when I'm using a crawler, I will do the same thing, except for I will switch instead of, whoa, hello. Instead of using a short shank jig, I will switch to a long shank tungsten jig. And this isn't gonna make a huge difference because honestly, when these fish, walleye specifically, will eat a leech or a crawler, they usually take it down in one big bite, no matter what. But sometimes the little bit different in that little extra length can be the difference between catching a fish and missing a fish. So I like to, just a small subtle tweak that I will do to, you know, if it adds 1-2 more fish throughout the day, it is 100% worth it. Another thing that I will do is I will take off the jig and I will use a split shot or an egg weight, and then I will just do a plain hook. And this is an awesome presentation. It's very finesse. When I do that, I will push my worm all the way through over the eyelet on the hook, or I'll just hook the leech right underneath the sucker like I would with the jig as well. That is, again, one of the most finesse presentations you can do with slip bobbers. But the other nice thing that I will do is I'll upsize that hook to like a 1 or a 2, and I will use a big minnow. This is kind of an underrated technique, especially for big fish. And I've been doing this a little bit with some of these big suspended fish out over open water. When you want something that they are gonna maybe not be in a super finicky mood, not even working a reaction bait is gonna get them to bite, being able to get a big creek chub or a big red tail and being able to cast those things out, let it fall down right in front of their face, even if they're down 20 feet, over 40 feet of water, being able to use that single hook. It's almost like a Lindy rig. You know, if you've ever used Lindy rigs, you know how effective they are. Sometimes in the fall, that's all I'll get them to bite. They'll even be right underneath the boat. I'll just drop that straight down and they need that minnow swimming around. If you have it on a jig, it's not gonna swim around quite as much. So being able to have that on that single hook, let that thing swim around, that is one of the things that can get some of those big smart fish to bite. So definitely more of a deep dive so far. Now I'm gonna give you some very practical tips and tricks, some things that I do, just little nuances that can make the difference between you catching fish or not. One of the first ones that I'm gonna talk about is using your rod to determine your length. So for example, I'm looking over here, I can see a group of fish, you know, 3-4 fish on top of those weeds, and they look like they're down about 8 to 10 feet. So when I'm looking right here, this one specifically is a 7'5" rod. So I know my rod length is about 7 feet 5 inches. So if I pull my bobber stop all the way down, I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I'll go to the wide angle over here. If I pull my bobber stop all the way down, I know, okay, that's 7 feet, 8, 9, 10. This may be at like 11 feet. So for example, for these fish, I would reel up, slide my bobber stop down, because I want them to be probably about at my rod length if they're down that far, because I typically want to keep my baits above these fish. Another one that I'm going to talk about is sometimes you'll notice that when you cast on these fish with a slip bobber, just the slip bobber hitting the water can spook them. Today it hasn't been an issue, even though I'm in pretty shallow water, hasn't been an issue. But what I like to do is I like to cast beyond the fish. And the other thing, when you're casting, try to do kind of a big looping cast, because if you're doing that snap cast, stuff is going to get tangled up. So I kind of have a little bit of an issue because I have cameras and nets and stuff all situated everywhere. But if I didn't, it'd be a little easier. But what I want to do is I see fish at about 35, 40 feet. So I'm going to do a big looping cast. They're kind of right in their zone. One was coming for it already. Looked. So I might reel, get a little closer. Oop. Did he come up and hit it? Nope, he didn't. Another thing is, when they're sitting down there, especially if they had a chance to look for a little bit, don't hesitate to give it a little pop. Sometimes giving that little bit of pop, that little bit of action, can be just enough to trigger some of these fish to bite. The other thing that I will do is give it a little more action by just doing a slow, steady retrieve. Sometimes it triggers like they're pulling away from it. That can be what can get these fish to bite. Ooh, you can see those ones came up once I started moving it, they all started coming up for it. Doesn't mean they will always bite, but just a couple little tips and tricks that you can do to help you catch 1, maybe 2 more fish throughout the day, and sometimes make the day worthwhile. Also, know the wind, you know, not only for casting, but also where it's gonna drift. A lot of times I like to try set up with the fish right behind me, so that way I know I can control where they're gonna be, but sometimes they're gonna be to your side, depending on how the structure sets up. So I'm gonna cast in front of those fish and let that bobber drift backwards over top of those. So know your wind, make accurate casts. Another tip with the wind is, if you need to, upsize your weights. Upsize your egg weight, your split shot, upsize your jig. That way you can get up and down very quickly. Because if you're too light and that wind's blowing too hard, like it has been most days this year, that is going to get your bait down there quicker, and you're actually gonna be able to present your bait. So doesn't matter how finesse, how small the jig is, if you can't get your bait in front of it, it's not gonna be worthwhile. So make sure you are upsizing your weights if you need to get them down. Another group right there, about 50 feet. Should be pretty close to those guys. There, he popped it. Yep, just barely taking it under. Reel down till I feel weight. Set the hook, big swinging hook set. Another tip when you are setting the hook on these fish, you want to reel down. That is one of the first mistakes that a lot of people, even people that have fished for a while, will make. They will see that bobber go down and they act like they are fishing panfish, and, whoa, feisty little guy, and they'll just try to set the hook right away. Essentially what's that doing, I'll give you a visual in just a second. There we go, just got to a new group. So like I said, you want to make sure that you are reeling down. Right now, when your bobber is sitting there, your bobber's line is sitting like this. So if you set the hook right away, all you're doing is straightening out that line. That's not going to put any weight, that's not going to set the hook. All that's going to do is put a little pressure on that fish, and they'll sometimes spook. So being able to have that line like this, you reel down, basically until you start feeling weight. Sometimes I'll tell clients to, you know, point the rod tip straight at the bobber. Another thing, my buddy Lee, we were just talking, what he tells his clients, have that rod tip up just a little bit so you can start to see that tip move when you're seeing that fish or feeling that fish. Basically, reel down fast until you feel that fish, then do a big swinging hook set. It's not just gonna be a little snap like that. You're gonna do a big swinging hook set, which is actually going to lead right into kind of my next tip, my next set, and that is rod, reel, line, all of that. So I'm gonna get this untangled here. I like to use a longer rod for these. The two that I'm using, this one is the Precision Shooter by Tubi. It is specifically made for slip bobbers. I'll go show you the other one really quick. The other one is called the Sharpshooter. One thing you'll notice, this one a little bit longer. See if I can do it here without doing anything. It actually is a telescoping rod, so it can still fit in your rod locker. This one's even longer. This one is 8 feet. So a little bit longer rod, which is very, very nice, and I'll talk about that right now. I like having that longer rod because, as I just got done talking about, you want to do those big sweeping hook sets. You want to be able to get rid of as much line as possible, because even reeling down, there might still be that little bit of slack in that line. Having a longer rod is very helpful for being able to get hooks buried into these fish. The other thing that's nice is this is a moderate action, meaning it's not just that very fast little tip, it's more of a curve throughout the rod. And that's nice because you can really reel into these fish and have that start to bend, and then you can give that big swinging hook set and you'll be able to bury that hook. The other thing that you'll notice with these rods, they have, it's going to be kind of hard to see, but they have oversized guides. And if you've ever fished slip bobbers before, you know how important having oversized guides are. And that is because these little pieces right here, you can see I used actually the bad bobber stop on this one. You can see how it's frayed, but you can see how easily that is to get tangled up into the guides when you're casting. So having oversized guides, having a longer rod, moderate action, again, these are specifically made for slip bobbers. And if you've been around the walleye scene, you know that with forward-facing sonar, slip bobbers are more and more efficient than ever. I like to use that with a 3000 size reel. This one is the Piscifun Carbon X 2 3000. The reason I like the 3000 size reel is having that little bigger spool. You can peel line out a little quicker when you're reeling that up. Again, sometimes with the wind, you're having a lot of slack. You can just reel down very quickly to get all that slack out, and then you can give that big sweeping hook set once you start to feel that weight. Well, we got some storms rolling in just a little bit, so I'm gonna get off the water. A lot more talking today than fishing. Hopefully you found some value in this video. I do have some more of these planned where I'm gonna be talking through a little more deep dive of some of my presentations that I use frequently. If you have any that you would like me to go through, have any questions, drop those in the comments. What presentations would you like to see me give a little bit more of a deep dive on, how I work them, what I use, all of those kinds of details? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.